A Canadian guard who loves to push the tempo and who led the ACC in assists last year entered the portal. And folks, you can bet that Mark Few gave him a call.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Folks, head to 5 Hour Energy to find over 15 flavors to choose from. And if you need one now, you can grab a 5 Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. Stock up today and stay energized. Well, we got another transfer to talk about today. Gonzaga's contacted Georgia Tech guard Naithan George. We're going to talk about why he's a fit in Spokane, who he reminds us of a little bit. And then we're going to close out the show with our first season in review episode for a player who has not entered the transfer portal. We did season review episodes for Dusty Stromer and Michael Jai and Junsook Yo. Now we are taking on Caleiff Battle. We're going to talk about his complicated season in Spokane, his legacy, a little bit about his future playing basketball to close out the show. But we start with the news that came out on Thursday morning, afternoon-ish, that Gonzaga is one of many schools that has contacted Georgia Tech transfer guard Naithan George. George is a 6'3" rising junior. He is from Ontario, Canada, and that's where we want to start. Gonzaga loves their Canadian guards. They have landed 2 Canadian guards who were in the transfer portal after spending 2 years at their previous destinations. That would, of course, be the Nembhards, Andrew Nembhard, who transferred to Gonzaga after 2 years at Florida, and then his younger brother, Ryan Nembhard, who transferred to Gonzaga after 2 years at Creighton. So the trend could continue here with Naithan George, who spent 2 years at Georgia Tech, then transferring to Gonzaga. Doesn't have the same last name. Play style, though, fairly similar to what we saw from the Nembhards while in Spokane. He's a little mix of both in some ways. And so I think there's an interesting element there. Of course, Kevin Pangos from Canada and some other non-guards, Kyle Wiltshire being a notable one, also a transfer. Mind you, the Zags have had a lengthy history of top-tier players from Canada, obviously Kelly Olynyk, Mengistu Arap. There's many others as well. So it's fun to see Gonzaga continuing to pursue players from Canada, and that pipeline is alive and well. We know that. George played at Dream City Christian High School in Glendale, Arizona. It's a bit of a basketball factory out here on the West Coast, so he does have some connection to the West Coast. He was a 0-star prospect, interestingly, had very little interest coming out of high school. Damon Stoudemire, who has some connections to the state of Arizona as well. Perhaps that's how he was able to discover him and plopped him over to the ACC over at Georgia Tech. And very immediately, Naithan George had success for the Yellow Jackets. As a freshman in the 23-24 season, George started 28 out of 29 games played. He averaged about 30 minutes per game. He averaged just under 10 points and 5 assists, as well as 2.5 rebounds. This is a true freshman, an unranked, unheralded freshman coming to an ACC program, the power conference level, and starting and putting up productive numbers immediately. He shot 50% on 2-pointers on about 5 attempts per game. He shot 31.5% from 3 on about 3.5 attempts per game. Not a great free throw shooter at the time, just under 70%. But then after his freshman year, we saw George take a sophomore leap, as it were, coming into his second season, and had an incredibly productive season for the Yellow Jackets. 34 games, started every single one of them, played about 36 minutes per game. If you're looking for some comparisons to Ryan Nembhard, 35.5 minutes per game is almost exactly what Ryan Nembhard averaged during his 2 years at Gonzaga. So Naithan George, somebody who's familiar with spending very little time on the bench, night in and night out in his college basketball career. He averaged 12.3 points, 6.5 assists, 4.2 boards, and just over 1 steal per game. The efficiency offensively is one area of, I don't want to say concern, but an area of potential growth. Let's put it that way. Averaged just over 44% on 2-pointers this past season on about 6 attempts per game. Did improve the 3-point shooting, was 31.5 as a freshman, that was up to 34 as a sophomore on over 5 attempts per game. So again, We've been talking about that a lot on the show. Players who are high volume 3-point shooters tend to be more projectable as good 3-point shooters. So over 5 3-point attempts per game at 34%. I mean, that's not terrible. It's not great, mind you, but it's also not terrible. It's actually pretty similar to who we're going to spend the rest of the show talking about, Khalif Battle, who was a inconsistent 3-point shooter, but also I wouldn't say a bad 3-point shooter, just not quite sure which version you were going to get night in and night out. We also saw George boost his free throw shooting from 69% as a freshman to 79% as a sophomore. So certainly some optimism regarding the outside shooting as well for players who tend to shoot well from the stripe. George finished his sophomore season first in the ACC in assists per game and second in the ACC in overall assists. He was 11th in the country in 221 assists. 11th in the country, nearly cracked the top 10. I think Donovan Dent was 10th at 224, so 3 more assists from George, and he would have been top 10. Obviously, Ryan Nembhard was first in that category, but for Gonzaga to be pursuing somebody else who was on the leaderboards in terms of total number of assists last year is noteworthy. George had 5 double-doubles in his sophomore season. He also had a near triple-double against Virginia in the ACC tournament where he had 13 points, 10 rebounds, 8 assists, and a pair of steals. A couple other notable performances from George. He had 28 points, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds in a 3 overtime win for Georgia Tech against Clemson. He had 26 points, 8 assists, shot 5 of 8 from 3 in an overtime win over Cal during the regular season as well. Brandon Jenkins of 247 Sports is who reported the schools that have shown interest in Naithan George, who have contacted him since he entered the transfer portal. There was 10 schools listed. Jenkins did say among others, so it sounds like there are some other schools who have reached out as well. The 9 other schools outside of Gonzaga that have contacted Naithan George are as follows: North Carolina, Texas, Louisville, Syracuse, Georgia, Arizona State, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Stanford. Obviously a strong list of schools. A strong contingency of ACC schools who have seen George up close and personal from his time at Georgia Tech. That would include North Carolina, Louisville, Syracuse, and Stanford, all coming from the ACC. North Carolina makes a lot of sense. They've lost both RJ Davis and Elliot Cadeau to the transfer portal, Davis to eligibility. So they have some room in their backcourt. Louisville loses Chucky Hepburn, loses a couple other guards to the transfer portal as well. Makes sense there. Sean Miller, the new coach at Texas after leaving Xavier, had a lot of success bringing in transfer guards at Xavier. Will likely look to do that as well, heading over to Texas. And the extra NIL cash and prestige coaching a school like Texas could help Sean Miller land some really high-profile transfers, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're hard in on Naithan George, who I think fits Sean Miller's system really well, which also is pretty similar to Gonzaga's system, which is why I think he is a strong fit at Gonzaga as well. For Gonzaga, he is more of a pure point guard, and we've talked about this. There's, Donovan Dent obviously was another pure point guard that Gonzaga was pursuing in the portal. They have a player that's expected to take over point guard next year in Braden Smith, the transfer from Colgate, who redshirted this past season. He put up similar numbers, 12 points, 5 assists at Colgate, has spent a year learning from Ryan Nembhard on the bench. However, Mark Few's best teams at Gonzaga have kind of gone with these 2 point guard lineups. We saw it in the national championship run of 2017 when they started Nigel Williams-Goss and Josh Perkins. We saw it in the national championship run in 2021 when they started Jalen Suggs and Andrew Nembhard. So it's certainly not a surprise to see Mark Few looking at other point guard options. Braden Smith's about 6 foot, whereas Naithan George here is 6'3". So you're kind of looking, that's the only thing that would give me pause here, is you're sort of looking at a backcourt that would be similar to the size of the Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman backcourt, which had its issues, particularly defensively. They could get bullied by bigger guards. Teams that had bigger backcourts tended to do well against Gonzaga. So that would be something that I would be a bit weary of. Now, Jalen Warley coming in helps a ton in the sense that he's so long and so good on the defensive end. An extra year of development for Emmanuel Innocente should help him be even stronger on that end of the floor as well. But I do feel like the need for Gonzaga is more so a score first shooting guard, like a bigger 2 guard. Trayson Eaglestaff was a player Gonzaga was pursuing before he committed to South Carolina. He's a 6'6" 2 guard who shot well from 3 and averaged 18 points a game. Yes, it was at North Dakota, but that's the kind of player that I think fits what Gonzaga needs. Whereas George is a tremendous player. And if you can, let me be clear. If you can get Naithan George, you get Naithan George. You do it. You figure everything else out. If that means Braden Smith's actually coming off the bench, fine. You make that work. If it means you start 2 guards and they're a little bit smaller, fine. You make that work. You may have to, be more diligent about playing, not playing those guys together as often as they relied on Hickman and Nembhard. Maybe that's kind of part of it is what Warley plays more at the 2 or Innocente plays more at the 2. I'm not sure the exact solution, but a Canadian guard who likes to push the tempo, who averaged over 6.5 assists per game in the ACC, you have to go after him. I mean, this is a perfect fit for Gonzaga. George could come to Spokane and have a similar progression to Nembhard, where maybe the first part of the year is a little bit kind of getting your bearings straight, take off in the second half, come back for your senior year and put up some of the best passing numbers in history. It's not crazy to imagine, based on what we've seen of Naithan George for 2 years at Georgia Tech, that he could have a similar progression in Spokane with Mark Few and the Zags. And that means you have to pursue him. You have to offer him a competitive offer to see if you can get him to come across the country, because the fit is really, really good with his program. Well, folks, Mark Few told us he'd never had a player like Caleiff Battle before. And now that the Caleiff Battle experience is over, we can kind of see both the good and the not so good in that statement. We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, life moves pretty fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. And that's why securing their future is so important. And Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. As a parent, I want to make sure that my family is financially protected no matter what happens, and Fabric gives me that peace of mind. You can get $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. So protecting your loved ones, it just doesn't have to break the bank. Fabric also offers digital wills and access to investment accounts to help you plan for your child's future. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Price is subject to underwriting and health questions. College basketball season is wrapping up. Baseball season is now in full swing, and there is no better way to get in on all of the remaining action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. So whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, Prize Picks keeps every game exciting. Setting a lineup takes less than 60 seconds, and when you win, your payout is quick, safe, and secure. I always like to take advantage of their Taco Tuesday deals when the Prize Picks offers discounts on select player projections for even more value. We got baseball season coming up, but we still got 3 more games in the NCAA tournament. With these 2 games coming up on Saturday, I'm going to talk about the player projections for the stars for those teams. Cooper Flagg over under 19 points for Duke against Houston. LJ Cryer over under 16 points on the other side of that one. And then in the SEC matchup, Florida Auburn, Walter Clayton 21 points over or under. And then Janai Broom, the player of the year co-front runner with Cooper Flagg, his over under is set at 20. If you like any of those, like any of the MLB odds coming out, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we're moving away from talking about Naithan George, the latest player to have interest shown from Gonzaga in the transfer portal. Latest as of this recording, we're getting updates on a minute-by-minute basis as the transfer portal, once again, a chaotic but fun part of the early offseason for the Gonzaga men's basketball team. We're going to now talk about Caleiff Battle. We're going to do our season in review series. For those of you who've been longtime listeners to the show, we've been doing this for a couple of years where we give each player a preview episode, what we think their stats are going to look like, what we think their role is going to look like, their best and worst case scenarios. And then at the end of the season, we do these recap episodes, kind of going over the history, going over how their season went, what their future might look like. We've been condensing these a little bit with so many different transfer portal things happening, but we're going to do today's on Caleiff Battle. We're going to talk about his history. We're going to talk about his performance this past season, a little bit about his legacy, and what his future might look like knowing he is out of eligibility. Battle came to Spokane for his 6th season of college basketball. He was a transfer portal addition this year, right around the deadline to enter the transfer portal. We know that because Luka Krajinovic entered the transfer portal basically on the last day you were allowed to. And shortly after that, Gonzaga used that scholarship to sign Caleiff Battle. It kind of felt like that was a reshuffling of the rotation for the Zags at that time. Battle began his college basketball career way back in 2019, the 2019-20 season, where the NCAA tournament was canceled because of COVID. Caleiff Battle was on Butler at that time, played about 11 minutes per game, transferred after that year to Temple, spent 3 years at Temple, but only played 18 games in his first 2 years combined due to significant injury issues. In his third and final season with the Owls, he played 27 games, averaged about 18 points per game. That was enough for him to get recruited by Eric Musselman at Arkansas, who added basically every single guard he could possibly add in the transfer portal that offseason, brought this huge collection of guards with him to his final year at Arkansas. It didn't work. It was a weird, messy, convoluted roster. I didn't really see the point of it, but Caleiff Battle had his moments at Arkansas. He finished the season averaging about 15 points per game in about 25 minutes, but at the end of the year, in his final 7 games in an Arkansas uniform, Caleiff Battle went nuclear, 29.5 points per game. He had multiple 35-point games. He had a 42-point game against Missouri at the end of the regular season for Arkansas. Just incredible stuff. That really put him on the radar as a top-tier transfer option. Again, had been in college for a long time, so he's an older prospect, which those tend to do very well in college. He'd been dealing with injury issues, but was healthy at the time, coming off monster performance at the end of the year. It felt like a slam dunk, like this kid's going to be great. It's the same Gonzaga roster as the year prior, but one of the biggest issues Gonzaga had 2 years ago was not having enough depth in the backcourt. You replace Krajinovic with Battle. He's a better scorer. He's a more experienced player. Everything felt like it was trending in the right direction. We mentioned this quote in the teaser there, but Mark Few said, "We've never had a player like Caleiff Battle in terms of his ability to put pressure on the rim, to get to the free throw line, just the score first mentality that he had." And throughout the year, for those of you who listen to this podcast regularly, you know that I referenced that quote by Mark Few multiple times in kind of a good way and a bad way, because I think we saw the full scope of the greatness a player like Caleiff Battle, who can bend the defense and take over basketball games, the pure greatness and just energy that you get from watching a player like that, who I mean, we haven't had Jalen Suggs could dominate games down the stretch. We've had a few others. Nigel Williams-Goss did it a bit differently, but he could dominate games down the stretch from the guard position. But we haven't had a lot of guards who just like take over games offensively as scorers. And Caleiff Battle is one of the few who's been able to do that, but he couldn't do it consistently. And the amount of times where you just 3 minutes into a game be like, this is going to be a frustrating Caleiff Battle game. Like it was a hard thing to get used to, of like, we don't really know which version of this player we're going to get. And again, for those who listen throughout the regular season, I would do keys to victory. And I was tempting to put Caleiff Battle as an X factor for every game, because it's like whichever version shows up dramatically changes the likelihood of Gonzaga winning this game. Like it was just, against bad teams, it was like, okay, we can stomach a poor Caleiff Battle game here. But against the top half of this conference and in all their non-conference games, Gonzaga really needed the best version of Caleiff Battle. And when they got it, great. When they didn't get it, they really struggled. Overall, we'll give a quick overall look at his season. He averaged, he played 35 games. He started 31 of them, played about 27 minutes per game, 13.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, 1.5 assists, a little over a steal per game. Shot about 35% from three, which is pretty consistent with his entire career. Shot 53% on twos, which was a career high for him. He also shot 93.2% from the free throw line. That was a career high for him. It also led the NCAA. He went 123 out of 132 from the stripe. He was named to the All-WCC tournament team, but he was snubbed from the WCC regular season awards. Not even an honorable mention, which felt kind of crazy to me for Battle. But of course, Gonzaga didn't win the league, which tends to limit the amount of players you get on those all WCC awards, whether that's fair or not. That was the case here with Battle. Here's just a little bit more on the Caleiff Battle experience, what this looked like this past year. In 11 of Caleiff Battle's 35 games for Gonzaga, he scored 20 or more points. In 11 of Caleiff Battle's 35 games for Gonzaga, he scored 9 or less points. And then in the other 13 games, he scored between 10 and 19 points. So you're basically rolling the dice You got a 33% chance of getting a 20 burger from Battle. You got a 33% chance of getting 10 or less. And then you got about a little over like a 34% chance of getting somewhere in the middle. That's in a nutshell kind of encapsulates what this Caleiff Battle experience looked like for Gonzaga fans. Like, are we going to get the dude who can drop 20 and a half? Are we going to get the dude who's just a non-factor offensively this entire game, or who's in foul trouble and doesn't ever really get to impact the game the way that we need him to? Another factor, and I just pulled this data, and I'm glad I was able to take a look at this because I think it's another really important look at how impactful Battle was with his most important skill, which is getting to the free throw line. And I think some of the blame for Caleiff Battle not being as consistent in terms of free throw attempts falls on the coaching staff. I don't think this is all on Caleiff Battle. I think Caleiff Battle was put in positions where he was used as a spot-up shooter, which is not his skill set, and he got a lot of passes. He got the ball in the corner very often. I don't think Caleiff Battle is capable of attacking the rim and getting to the free throw line from the corner. When he would get the ball in the corner, he would shoot. I don't really blame him for that. But his ability to get to the free throw line was the single most important skill set that he brought to Spokane, and I do not think it was utilized enough. I think some of that falls on Battle, and I think some of that falls on the coaching staff. Here's the stat for you. In 8 of Caleiff Battle's 35 games, he had 7 or more free throw attempts. For the record, he averaged 7 free throw attempts for the entire season at Arkansas. He only had 7 or more free throw attempts 8 times in 35 games at Gonzaga. By the way, Gonzaga went 8-0 in those games where he had 37 or more free throw attempts, He had 18 of his 35 games, so half. A little more than half of Caleiff Battle's games, he had 2 or less free throw attempts, 2 or less in half of his games. For the player who led the country in free throw percentage, 18 of his 35 games, he had 2 or less free throw attempts. That is appalling. That is a significant problem for, again, Gonzaga, for Caleiff Battle, for the entire experience. Should have been better in this area. 9 of his games. So again, 8 of his games, he had 7 or more attempts. The Zags went 8-0. 9 of his 35 games, he didn't attempt a single free throw. 9 of them. He played 20 or more minutes in 6 of those 9 games. So it's not like, oh, these were games where he just didn't play. He played 16 minutes in one game. That was the Portland game where he was kind of benched. He played 18 minutes in another game, I think, and then 19, and then 20 plus. He had 30-minute games where he didn't attempt a single free throw. In those 9 games where Caleiff Battle did not attempt a free throw, the Zags went 5-4. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. Caleiff Battle is a phenomenal free throw shooter. Caleiff Battle is phenomenal at bending the defense, putting pressure on the opposing rim protectors, and getting to the line. When he did that, Gonzaga won. Yes, the quality of opponent matters here. Of course, there's more to it. But by and large, it would be ridiculous to assume that these stats are not in some way correlated with what Caleiff Battle was able to do and what he's best at doing and how it impacted Gonzaga's ability to win basketball games. So what's next for Caleiff Battle? What legacy does he leave behind as a one-year transfer? We've had many of them. Many of them have had big moments. Few of them have had as much of an individual impact statistically as Battle. So where does that kind of leave his legacy as he departs Spokane for his professional career? We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, if you are feeling that lost sleep, whether it's from daylight savings time, whether from staying up late this entire month watching March Madness games, 5 Hour Energy has your back. For me, the extra sunshine means a little bit more time for fun, but sometimes you just need a little boost to power through, especially as somebody who's been staying up late watching all these NCAA tournament games. Maybe you're squeezing in an extra round of golf after work. Maybe you're just trying to keep up with your busy day. Either way, 5 Hour Energy gives you that quick, refreshing pick-me-up whenever you need it. My co-host and I, Isaac Shade, Locked On College Basketball, we've been staying up super late, recording after these NCAA tournament games, been going out to Dallas for the bracket breakdown shows on Amazon Fire TV. And I tell you what, 5 Hour Energy is just the jolt that I needed to help me keep going through those tough days, whether I'm at the games, whether I'm traveling to Dallas. 5 Hour Energy is easy to grab and keeps me feeling refreshed. So folks, head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, and peach mango. You can even build your own 12 or 24 pack delivered right to your door. And if you need one now, grab a 5 Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. They're literally everywhere. Stock up today and stay energized. All right, folks, closing out the show, continuing our conversation, our season review episode For Gonzaga player Caleiff Battle, who spent 1 year in Spokane, but of course 6 years total in college basketball. He is out of eligibility. Started with him in terms of the least amount of mystery on this roster going forward. I don't want to do a season in review episode for a player who could, in theory, still enter the transfer portal or could still find a way to come back to Gonzaga for next year. Like, I wanted to be able to talk about a player that we kind of know the future. At least we know the future from a college basketball perspective. Nobody on this roster who is more obvious in that spot than Caleiff Battle. With respect to, of course, Ben Gregg and Nolan Hickman and Ryan Nembhard, who I wouldn't get your hopes up, folks. They're not coming back either. There's not really any reason that they would be able to get some extra eligibility. But for Caleiff Battle, we're pretty sure he's done. He doesn't seem like he's trying to fight and advocate for an extra year of eligibility. I'm not sure there'd be much of a case for it, but also the emotion that he showed at the end of his Gonzaga career, at the end of his college basketball career, without being able to get up a good shot attempt on that last possession for Gonzaga against Houston in the round of 32, a play that, mind you, I don't think was his fault. I don't really think it was. If Gonzaga, I think the most of the blame falls on the fact that the staff didn't have a timeout in that situation. I think that was a big issue, but Houston jumped the play. They got a little tip away. Battle he did what he was trying to do. He just wasn't able to get a shot off, but he was very emotional. Kelvin Sampson gave him a big old hug. It was a nice, tender moment in the NCAA tournament. For the record, I think he'll probably see it on one shining moment after the national championship game on Monday. But yeah, I think we're done with Caleiff Battle as a college basketball player, and I'm not sure we're going to see much of him professionally, at least not at the NBA level. He's an older prospect. He's got some NBA skills, like the stuff that he's good at is valuable skills in the modern NBA, but his age, his size, I mean, he's 6'5", he's well built, but he's not like overly big for an NBA player. And the 3-point shooting is just not consistent enough. The good version of Caleiff Battle, who knocks down like 7 of 9 from 3, like if he was more consistently that guy, if he was a 40% 3-point shooter, I think he might get some looks even at his age. But with his age, with his injury history, with his lack of 3-point shooting, I just don't think that that's enough for him to be. He's not going to get drafted. I think he'll get some looks. What I actually think about Caleiff Battle, as somebody who's watched a lot of like summer league basketball and watched some G League basketball and kind of paid attention to that league, Battle seems like a guy who would kill it at that level. Like Caleiff Battle is going to get signed by somebody in the summer league, and he's going to put up like 25-point games because the summer league is complete chaos. There's not really any time to develop any plays or coaching outside of and everybody just all they're trying to do is show off and look good. Which is justified. It's not a criticism that you're trying to make a roster. You got to go take care of yourself. Caleiff Battle is going to be really good at that. He's been really good at creating his own shot. He's going to be really good at getting the line and converting there. Like, I think he's going to be somebody who has some summer league performances that pop. And if he chooses to play professionally in the G League, he's going to pop off there. Like if Caleiff Battle spends next year in the G League, there's going to be a day where we get a notification that's like Caleiff Battle dropped 40 for the, Long Island Nets or Rip City Remix or Fort Wayne Mad Ants or whatever G League team he plays for, he's going to drop 40 for him. Like, I feel like that feels like not inevitable, but a very likely outcome over the next calendar year if you want to make a prediction on something that might happen for Caleiff Battle in that period of time. In terms of legacy for Caleiff Battle and his career at Gonzaga, I'm going to quote the great Free Ira Brown podcast. If you guys haven't listened to that one, been around for a very long time. They said Yoko this year, which was you only Caleiff once. And I like that because I think this is it. This is all we get from Caleiff Battle. The good, the bad, the ugly, whatever it was. Like, we got 1 year of Caleiff Battle, and he was a polarizing player. He was very emotional. He was very inconsistent. He had turnover issues at times. He had foul issues at times. He is a frustrating player in Gonzaga's history, but he also had some of the most jaw-dropping moments of the season. He also at times made it very clear he's the most talented player on Gonzaga's roster last year. Not the best, not the most productive, but the talent, the athleticism, the fact that he dropped 20 against Oregon State in basically like 7 minutes in the first half in that game at home. He had the tremendous dunk against Kentucky in the battle in Seattle. He had multiple alley-oop dunks that he threw down. He had some moments where he would just hit back-to-back-to-back threes and just completely carry the team. Few players in Gonzaga basketball history have been able to do that. And the list of players who have is a list of some of the best of all time. The Adam Morrisons, the Jalen Suggses, those types of players who've taken over ball games down the stretch. Battle could do that, but he couldn't do it consistently enough to be the player that Gonzaga fans hoped that he could be in Spokane. And in terms of his legacy, when you compare him to other one-year transfers, it's going to be interesting how he's perceived in that conversation, because he's better than a lot of the other one-year transfers Gonzaga's had. He's better than the Gerard Colemans, the Byron Wesleys, the Gino Crandalls. But then there are some others who, I don't know if he's better than Jordan Matthews, but Jordan Matthews will probably forever be more remembered because he hit that incredible shot to send Gonzaga to the Final Four. I think it's going to be, statistically, Battle's better than most of the one-year transfers Gonzaga's had, but because his expectations were so high, and because watching him was an exercise in like patience for the fan base, I think he's maybe not going to be remembered as fondly as he arguably should be. I think the closest comp that I could find for him was Admon Gilder. Admon Gilder spent 1 year at Gonzaga after transferring from Texas A&M. He came from an SEC program similar to Battle. He played about 26 minutes per game, similar to Battle. He scored about 11 points per game, a little lower than Battle. But I think that that's kind of the closest comp. But I feel like Battle will be remembered as more of a disappointment than Gilder was, even though I think it's purely just because the expectations were higher for Battle than they were for Admon Gilder. We also didn't get to see Gilder in the NCAA tournament because that's the year that it was canceled because of COVID. But that's kind of the closest comp I could come up with for him. And the Zags are out actively looking for a replacement for Battle. Guys like Trayson Eaglestaff, who we mentioned earlier, who went to South Carolina from North Dakota. But they're also eyeing Sam Lewis from Toledo. We talked about him, and Rodney Rice from Maryland on recent episodes. Yesterday's episode, we talked about Isaiah Pasha from Delaware, Bryce Lindsey from James Madison. Not exactly Caleiff Battle players specifically, but all bigger guards who are going to kind of play an off-ball role for Gonzaga, and I think are players that they're kind of eyeing to potentially be that Caleiff Battle replacement. And then, of course, you have Jalen Warley, who, by the way, could not be more opposite of a player to Caleiff Battle. He's a facilitator on offense who does not look to score, who's a very, very good defender. Very different from Caleiff Battle, but he's going to step into a lot of minutes at the 3 next year. So he's kind of already the Caleiff Battle replacement of sorts, just replacing him in position, but certainly not in play style or overall production for the Zags. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Have a fantastic weekend. We'll be back next week with more transfer portal updates as we get them coming in. But until then, as always, go Zags.